Hello and welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me in another of my wonderful interviews. Now, today, I hope that I'm not going to be sniffing and coughing and spluttering because we're coming into the autumn here, change of air, so please excuse the red-nosed reindeer sitting here in front of you. But don't let that worry you because I'm going to try not to do most of the talking and leave it to my guest, who is an author and sent me a book fairly recently, which I have read. It is called The Bug in Our Thinking and the Way to Fix It. And if I move my finger there, you'll see his name is Hugh Willbourn. And on the back, it says he's a therapist, a negotiation consultant, and a storyteller. And let's just underline storyteller because I think we're going to be talking about narrative and stuff like that. I am very interested to speak to him because we are in very odd times at the moment, as you know, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, I'm talking to the wrong camera. There we go. And we have had a lot of narratives coming to us through the media, and some of them we perhaps don't necessarily believe, and some of them perhaps we do. So it's interesting to see how that works and how that works on the mind. And talking of the mind, I should also add the little icing on the cake for me, because Hugh has worked with hypnotist Paul McKenna. Hugh, welcome to the show. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me, Richard. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I'm glad you came because I have read your book, The Bug in Our Thinking, which is a curious book, I have to say, because partly it's unexpected in the way that it is delivered. Inasmuch as you take us down several little journeys and then you sort of deliberately divert us somewhere else, keeping us as readers on our toes. And now I imagine that part of it was absolutely deliberate. And I'm curious whether your editor said anything, or your publisher rather, was sort of going, hang on a minute, where are you going with this? Because I've not met a book like this quite that deliberate, I suppose.
Well, I'm delighted that you haven't met a book like it, Richard. I've and actually I worked with the same copy editor on this book that I did with many books with Paul, and she said at first she was like, "What's going on? What's going on, Hugh? What are you doing?" But she said the more she read it, the more she liked it, and it comes. Somebody asked me, how on earth did you write it like that? And I said, well, actually, I wrote probably over 1 million words. This is a short book. It's less than 70,000 words. I wrote probably 1 million words, trying over and over again to express myself, to say something that was interesting and useful. And I threw nearly all of it away. Oh. And actually, this book is all that's left, all that still, I think, is interesting. There's lots and lots of stories. And I'm trying to explain and talk about stuff that is interesting, but normally we get lost in the explanation. Philosophy as an academic discipline is extraordinarily inaccessible. There are all sorts of arguments and lots of jargon that if you pick up the average philosophy book, what's that? What's verification transcendence? What do you mean by that? Immediately the language is very off-putting. And academic philosophy is very strange, really, because it's meant to be about, reality, the depth of things, what's true, what can we know, what's real, what's a good argument. And my own experience, which was quite strange, really, I did a first degree and then later a PhD in philosophy, was that although it's meant to be about the fundamentals of life, really, of existence, it's actually incredibly fashionable. It's all about what academics actually talk about is what everybody else is talking about right now. The discourse over the last 2 or 3 years and this particular argument about this particular angel on a pinhead, as they used to say in medieval times, these extraordinarily obscure arguments about tiny little details, even though it's meant to be about everything. And for many years, I found that frustrating. So this book, one of the things I'm trying to do is take a little bit of philosophy and actually make it understandable for you and me.
What I found interesting was quite early on you're talking about the word. What is a word? And you ask this question, and you almost say, well, we all know what a word is, and then you tell us actually what a word is, and you go, you're sitting there reading it, going, oh yeah. Because it starts with the sound, and then you talk about storytelling, and actually I found that really interesting, the whole notion that actually the substance of the story, getting it right, is not so important, but the way you talk it, and the fact that it might have nuances and different changes in the actual contents of the story, but the overall story and the message in the story is the same. It's just you could listen to 5 or 6 different storytellers, and it would be a completely different experience.
Yep, each person will tell the story differently. But actually, I want to pick up on something there, Richard, because I would argue that the message of the story, well, there isn't one, and two, it doesn't stay the same. You can hear a story, and a few years later you hear it again, and you hear it quite differently. Something else comes out of it. So, in lots of ways, we can think of stories like a hologram. It depends where you are, what you see in the hologram. You see it this way, someone else sees it that way. And that's one of the reasons that there are lots of stories in this book, because I'm not I don't have the answer. There's not one answer. There's not a big answer that you've been waiting for and now I reveal it. It's not like that. But I'm going to suggest that all of us can understand a lot better through stories, actually through talking and listening to each other. And little by little, we develop something that you can't pin down. You can't nail it. You can't say, here's the truth about life. I mean, Douglas Adams brilliantly took the mickey out of that years and years ago. Do you remember in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he said the answer, it's 42.
Yes.
And frankly, that's as good an answer as you'll get, really.
Well, that's true. And funnily enough, I've had people who look at numbers and they say there's actually something in it. So you never quite know where these things come from. What I found interesting also was the fact that when you write something down on paper, you lose a lot of the essence of what that story is, because you've basically created a one view thing of the story, and it's suddenly become very limited.
Yes, I mean, one of the points I'm trying to make is that we imagine that if you write something down, it's more or less the same as talking. We talk, write it down. Yeah. It's the same stuff, really, isn't it? It's the same words. And one of the huge points that I'm trying to make in the whole book is that's not true. There is a great deal more that is in speech. Right now, for example, I don't know if it will do it, but on YouTube, you can get an automatic transcript, right, that you could read of us talking. And in that, there is none of the emphasis, none of the passion or the curiosity or the shock that we can put into our words with our tone, with our timing. And ultimately, it's not a technical thing. It's what do I feel? And that is manifest in my tone of voice. And so it's not just performance. It's like you can feel a little bit of me when you talk to me. It's even more the case if we're in the same room. But even on Zoom, even over the internet, we can feel more when we're talking like this than when we write something down.
Yeah, and from the viewer's point of view or the reader's point of view, you're getting a completely different experience if you're just reading a version of us, as you say, the text version of us. And people have told me, they've watched my monologues in meetings quietly, and they've had it on the phone, and you just think, oh my God, how do you get through that? And they're not then sort of getting the sense of fun, or even when people listen to, say, YouTube videos like this, and they put it on 1.5 speed or 2 times the speed, they're then speeding up the time that we have spent engaging in each other, and of course they have a completely different experience to what actually has happened, and I suppose as a consequence, various points might become well, it's just very different, because as I'm searching for words. If you put it up at twice the speed, I'm not so much searching for those words. They just sort of coming to me far quicker, which does make me seem a lot more intelligent and better than I am, more erudite than I would ordinarily be. So that again is part of the experience, isn't it? That you're in real time, you're getting that as true as you can, although people aren't in the same room as this. Would you say?
You're getting a richer experience with oral communication. You absolutely do. But the other point to make is that I'm trying to make in the book is that something strange happens when you start writing things down. And it doesn't just happen to the particular words that you write down, but it affects our thinking. That's why the book's called The Bug in Our Thinking. Because when you write something down, three things happen that didn't happen when speech is live. Right. First of all, it gets fixed. So if I write down, I'm sitting in a room with slightly yellow lighting. That's true. I can say that now. I'm sitting in a room with slightly yellow lighting. Clearly, that's not going to be true as soon as I go out to the kitchen, right?
No.
But it's true right now. And there's a sort of implication, therefore, that if I've written it down and it's true, it'll carry on being true, won't it? You know, and so the first thing we have is that we prioritize the sort of truth that is fixed. Now, there are some truths that are fixed, like the boiling point of water at sea level is 100 degrees centigrade, is 100 degrees centigrade at sea level. But there are many things that we talk about, particularly when we're talking with each other and talking about people and politics and society, that are very, very volatile. And we use fixed truths at our peril when we're trying to work with people and get things done. So fixed truth does exist. It's very important, but we have to be very careful, and we have to make sure that if the circumstances change, we update our understanding of the truth. And recently, we know there have been several occasions where that sadly hasn't happened at great cost. So the first thing that writing does that you actually can't do when you only have talking is you have a fixed notion of truth. The second thing that happens is that you lose the emotional tone. That's what we've been talking about. So I could say I really like this experience, and I could say that straight, sarcastically, enthusiastically. I could be very, very rude, but you wouldn't see it in the writing. Yeah.
And so curiously, this is. Sorry to interrupt you there, but curiously, this is something that somebody like me on YouTube, who is delivering something that an algorithm is listening to and approving, especially if you're in contentious areas, does not understand things like irony or satire. So you could say something in a certain tone, as you said, and it would go, oh, no, this is medical misinformation, which it may not be if it's taken in the way that it is supposed to be delivered to another human being, not an AI algorithm.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So not only do we lose that, but worse still, and this is much more subtle, but it affects society at large, the whole notion of emotional engagement and understanding gets kind of down-rated. So we tend to think that an official form that you have to fill in with legalistic nonsense on it is very important, and we should do it. And somebody shouting, "Oh, help, help, help! I've got this awful problem," is a bit of a hysteric. The reality might be the other way around. It might be absolutely the other way around, that the person screaming and shouting really does need help. And this official form, which has nothing emotional in it, is oppressive nonsense. But we overvalue under expressing emotion. Kind of weird. I mean, that's not to say there aren't people who have emotional issues that are not necessarily sorted, but we have a general sense that proper kind of thinking is logic and reasonable, and emotional understanding is some sort of fluff that we don't really need to worry about. And hence we get into all sorts of trouble. Because if I don't develop my emotional understanding, then when someone suggests something like completely bonkers, like everyone should just stay in their homes for some arbitrary reason, that's
Mm.
nuts. That's completely bonkers. That's completely inhuman, and it's never going to work, and it's pointless, right? Now, if you have a well-developed emotional understanding, you'll realize immediately that the the emotional cost of that is huge. It's just outrageous, and it should never be paid short of the Black Death sweeping the country. And when we quite clearly don't have the Black Death sweeping the country, we should not be telling old people that when, oh no, we're not going to go and see you again. We've just put you in a home and you're going to stay there till you die, because that's what happened.
Yes.
And that wasn't a great outcome for anybody.
So
So,
no, go on. So, Craig.
well, that's what happens when we lack emotional understanding, when we're simplistic. So
Yes.
all over the internet, you have people. I mean, right now there's something going on where everything's black and white. It's right or it's wrong. That's the fixed notion of truth. And then the response is ultra simplistic. I'm incredibly good. You're incredibly bad. Boom. End of story. So this is black and white emotions, which that's appropriate when you're about two, when you're just beginning to get the hang of emotions. But the whole point of bringing up children is helping them to discover all the gray areas and all the other axes, all the extraordinary richness of our potential and emotional response, which is not just a response, it's a way of perceiving the world, it's a way of understanding the world. So when we develop our emotions, we really develop ourselves and our understanding. And it's a profound and lifelong education, I would argue, which has been overlooked. Last thing, Richard, last
Yes.
consequence of
Hmm?
writing is that it makes easy and tends to overvalue abstraction. So,
Yes.
abstraction is to take one element out of a situation and say that's definitive or important or more important than anything else, or it's so important that we're not going to pay any attention to all the rest of it. We're just going to pay attention to this one thing. And this is over and over and over again. It's the cause of endless governmental stupidities. They have a policy to fix X or Y or Z, and the what they call the externalities, all the other costs are kind of, oh no, they're not important because we must fix X or possibly Y or Z, and it's absurd. But unfortunately, it's very much how government works.
And so by taking stuff into the abstract, and I know you spend a bit of time discussing this, you are taking away, in a way, the soul and the individual who might be connected to that, because because it's abstract. It's not actually human. And in the past couple of years, where we've had, as you alluded to, a similar Black Death type situation, we've had a lot of writing, excuse me, sometimes as these hypnotic three-word phrases that have been used, or
Mm-hmm.
otherwise text in newspapers, or written speech. So it appears that somebody's speaking, but they're actually just reading something that is already fixed.
Yeah.
And what we didn't really see was a lot of debate in which people would put several arguments into a conversation, so that you could perceive different points of view, because it just seemed that the text or the written word that we were given was very much a fixed idea, and anybody who had anything to argue against that wasn't even invited onto the platform.
Yeah, I know. So I
So
quoted.
what I was sort of asking is that written text seems to be a much easier way of controlling people than a looser spoken words.
Absolutely, and that's a function of the narrowness of modern education. Um, People overvalue the written word, and they undervalue, and therefore don't develop the skills of rhetoric, of persuasion, of talk. But everything swings and has its Rückschlag, the coming back again from that. So it's the pendulum swings. So here we are doing a podcast. Why are we doing
Yes.
that? Because it's become popular. People have a sense that we want to hear people talking. This writing stuff. It's jolly hard to do, and there's something missing, isn't there? And so we're
Yes.
all struggling back to reconnect. And I noticed you mentioned, I listened to one of your things the other day. You were talking about how you were traveling around doing appearances somewhere in various little theaters or wherever you were going, and how heartwarming and rewarding it was for you to meet people in the flesh.
Yes.
And I agree wholeheartedly with your sentiment and your understanding there, Richard, because I feel that these podcasts, they're wonderful, and they're a kind of step towards the next step, which is where more of us meet up more often and and are able to work together, perhaps in very simple ways, but just bypassing the nonsense of celebrity and mainstream nonsense, so that we just connect a little bit more easily. So we're doing it, and I'm very, very pleased to do this, with Zoom. But there's another step. As soon as I'm
Yeah.
back in England, I very much hope we can have a real cup of tea together. That sort of
Well,
thing.
and all of that. I mean, it makes so much difference to be in the same room. And one of
Yeah.
the things with the talks that I do is people say, "Oh, do you need an overhead projector?" Well, that's perhaps a bit old-fashioned now, an overhead projector. But do you need a screen and a laptop and a connection? And I say, no, I don't have any of that. I don't even have bullet points on what I'm going to talk about. I look at the room and I read the room as I talk. I don't have a set agenda at all. And very often there might have been something on the journey that I feel is an important way of getting into certain subjects, or something that someone's told me as we've arrived, or something like that. So it's very much off the cuff. I mean, obviously there's sort of general points that I want to make, but I often miss some out because I'm with that bunch of people. So in a way, the audience and myself become one, and we do questions and answers, of course, which also gives them a voice to ask those questions. And curiously, here's an interesting thing. I don't know whether this sort of goes into philosophy of whether people are nervous or not, but sometimes we've done it where people have written down the questions beforehand or in the break, and then they present them to me, and I read them for the first time and go, "Oh, okay, here's the answer." Or otherwise, it's people put their hand up and they ask them. Very often, that there's more written questions than there are people putting their hand up on the spur of the moment with a question. And I suppose that's because they've had time to think, and with a pen in their hand, they can compose a question more readily. But the overall experience of being in a room is so rewarding, and there's so much to that, and I know that you've worked with Paul McKenna, and of course hypnosis and the sort of stage hypnosis that he does works so much with a live audience in large numbers.
Yeah, it does. There's kind of two things there you mentioned, which are almost opposite each other. So
Right.
I just want to go back to what you were talking about, because it was a beautiful illustration of something so one of the things I teach is public speaking, confidence, that kind of stuff, performance. And you just illustrated beautifully the two things that I talk about over and over again: context and energy. so when you start to talk to people, for goodness sake, don't talk at them.
Mm.
Connect, ask a question, say hello. Where did you come from? Yeah, and so the what you're doing, even though you perhaps do most of the talking, is you're having a conversation. You're paying attention to the room, and you're noticing this person is looking a bit bored, and so you want to know, well, what do they need? Yeah.
Yes.
Um and and where's the energy is a wonderful question to ask as you come into the room. Where's the energy? It might be here with me, but it might be over there in the corner. Might be something very interesting going on in that corner. And I'm so context and energy are very important. So you know your stuff. So you don't have to read your notes. Like I know my book. Again, if I talk about it, I'm going to miss loads out because it's pretty condensed and intense. Yeah? But I don't have to think to myself, what do I know? Because it's already in there. And so I can pay attention to you. If I'm in a room, I can pay attention to the energy and the audience and what's going on. And exactly what you said is what happens. You get people feel much more free to talk to you because you're already in a conversation with them. And I think I hope we're doing a bit of that here, but I think it's a very important point that's easily overlooked because it's not about being clever and a great
No.
presenter and having a ton of skills. But on the contrary, it's being connected and open, and actually being honest in yourself is what helps other people be honest.
Yes. Well, I mean, for me, just I don't want to dwell on these talks, but one of the things, of course, is I know that I've spent this journey in the last 11 months learning so much. And I say to the audience who are steeped in the stuff, and they know probably so much more than I do. I say, well, listen, I'm the baby of the party. The only difference is I sit on a YouTube channel and talk about all these things and join some of the dots. And actually, if it wasn't for you guys telling me stuff, I would know nothing. So I'm certainly not going there. And I tell them I'm not an expert. I'm not pretending to be an expert. And so we more have a laugh about it. And I try and make it light and throw jokes. And then people at the end say, well, it was so nice because it wasn't your normal sort of, here's a lecture. And in the area that I often talk about could be quite frightening to people. But we make light of it and people go away inspired and full of energy. And I think that's where the spoken word really makes a huge difference. And to address your point about podcasting and them being interesting, is it seems to me we're in although we are told people's attention span is supposed to be very short, we are in a period where it seems fewer people are reading and they are happy to engage to listening. They don't have to watch this. I mean, that's the advantage of smartphones and things like that. They can just bung them to the side, prepare food or drive or sit on the train, whatever it is. They don't actually have to see our faces, but they can listen and engage and chuckle or criticize or frown with, but they're sort of with us in a one-sided way. But hopefully that the way that we do these sort of things is you're engaging them as part of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually why I've done an audio version of the book, because there are a lot of people who simply don't read. It doesn't fit into their lives anymore, but they can listen while they're doing the washing up or the gardening or the driving or whatever.
And I can see that this type of book works very well as audio. And I now this is something that I do that perhaps not very many people do. I love to read aloud. And so when you came to the stories in the book, it gave me, and I'm a bit of a performer anyway, I don't need anybody here, I can do it to myself. I would read aloud. The stories were the bits that I enjoyed reading out loud because they were written in a way that they were, and that's what you're talking about a lot of the time anyway. If you'd been
absolutely,
you were talking about being on a course and then you came up with this story, which was an incredible story. It was sort of went from one thing to another, where the squirrels went up in the sky and things like that. But you're able to read it out loud. Now that's something that I just love to do because words, I think, are lovely to say, and so I spend a bit of time doing that.
Well, I think, to be honest, I think we all love it. It's just that we've forgotten.
Mm.
So many years ago, when I started storytelling, I also used to play. I still do occasionally, but fiddle music, like folk Irish fiddle music.
Oh, right. Okay.
Um, and I got into dancing. Um, Not the Lindy, I hope later, but I got into just very simple rock and roll. I suddenly realized I'd become a pre-industrial entertainment center because that's all that we did
Yes.
before we had electricity and reading and writing and all that stuff. What did we do for fun? We told stories, we sang songs, and we danced. We had music, dancing, and stories. And
Yes.
sometimes they're all mixed up. So storytellers would often be singing their stories, and some of the dances, the traditional dances, would tell stories, or they would be dances about certain activities that you do, the harvest and so on. So the my point about literacy is not that it's a bad thing; it's a very, very good thing. But we suffer because we've thought, oh, well, that's all we need. Just send them off to school, reading and writing, that's
Yes.
what they need. And we've lost the old ways of learning. And indeed, in the old days, there wasn't really such a big difference between learning and living and working and entertainment. If you're singing a song while you're pulling in the fish onto your
Yes.
ship, are you doing entertainment? Not really. You're doing work. But is it more fun when you're singing the song? Yes, it is.
Yes.
Is it easier? Yes, it is, because it gives you a rhythm to work with. So before we had reading and writing, so therefore before we had anything like a modern school,
Mm.
people still learned a great deal. They learned extraordinary amounts about the world around them, about their environment, about how to build things, how to do things, how to cook things. So and how to get on with each other, how to live together, all of that. Everything that we now call, economics and history and psychology and philosophy and geography and blah, 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 blah. We had stories, which is a lot of that work. We had apprenticeship, where I would go and learn from someone who knew really what to do. And it wasn't just following them. It was a two-way relationship. I had to do all the sweeping up and so on, but I'd be told, that's good for you. The master
Mm.
apprenticeship relationship was a personal one. And there was experience. And we still can learn from experience, provided we're humble enough to realize we don't know what's going on. If we think we know
Yes.
the answer, we're going to learn nothing. But
And yeah, and I mean the fact that people still often tell stories, they don't really realise they're telling stories. If they're in the pub and they're
Mhm.
talking about their day, oh, this bloke turned up in this wonderful car and I looked and it was for sale and I just imagined I had the money. People naturally are telling stories all the time, even if it's an excuse. I was late because of the trains or whatever it is, and these people did this. And people love to embellish or add or improve or make it interesting. And when they do, you're drawn to people like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun. Like you were saying, enjoying reading out the stories. I think it in some ways I'm not saying anything new at all. Everybody has been talking about this stuff. The way I put it is we're all climbing the same mountain.
Mm.
And life's difficult, it's complicated, and we don't really understand it very well. And recently we've had the delusion that we do understand it, and it's becoming quite clear that we don't. That particularly those people who absolutely certainly know exactly what's going on, they're definitely wrong. But those of us with a little more humility are realizing, quite a lot of the stuff we're told isn't quite right. Doesn't mean I know the answer to everything. It just means I'm a little bit more discerning and skeptical. And
Mm.
one of my top tips to myself, actually, which is I find very useful, is I try to notice myself doing gratuitous judgments. Now, an easy way to do that, I live in Saigon in Vietnam, and the traffic here is quite special, right? It's very special. And as I drive down the road, people do extraordinary things. And if I find myself being really judgmental, I know that I'm not centered in myself. I need to let go of that. There are two reasons. One is if I get really judgmental, say, you stupid, why do you do that? The moment I'm wasting time judging that guy, something else is happening and I need to pay attention.
Yes.
But the other point is that we really don't need it. I try to judge as little as possible. Whenever I need to make a decision, boom, I have to make a judgment. Boom, I'm going to do it. But all the rest of it, all the you idiot, or he's talking rubbish, or what's all that nonsense? That's gets in the way. It's noise that prevents me from learning more. It's a whole lot better if I go, well, that's strange. Don't understand that at all.
Yes.
And so my own little mantra to myself when I hear myself doing judgments is like, oh right, there's something I have to sort out. That guy's going to drive the way he does, and it's his country, and he's been doing it for 50 years, so he's going to carry on doing that. I'm not in charge. I have to kind of go, oh, okay, this is how people drive, and I have to chill out a bit and
Yes.
kind of let go of that attempt to get it right.
Yes, absolutely, and there's a certain amount of freedom, isn't there? Once you had that humility, and that you're not sort of stuck in these very rigid patterns, you start to think in a different way. And talking of that, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit because you mentioned Paul McKenna, and of course we know of him as a hypnotist, and so you do talk about hypnosis and that sort of stuff in the book, which fascinated me because when I was young, my dad, who ran his own business and was my dad, revealed to me that he used to do a little bit of hypnosis when he was in the RAF. Now, this was his national service that he was doing when he was in his 20s, I suppose, or 18 to 20s. And at the time, I was about 15 or 16 when he would tell me this. And I was fascinated because to me, it was this sense of mind control, and you can make people do what you want, all of that. And as a young person who'd been to a comprehensive school, all boys, and was bullied, the idea of being able to have a bit of mind control over people was quite good. However, he did try to hypnotize me, but because I was so interested in the process, I was too alert, and I just would not let go. I subsequently did buy some books on hypnosis, and later on, I found situations in which I could try it out on people, and again, not so much by having any set instructions or really forgetting what the book had told me, was just doing it really and experimenting with it, and as long as I brought people out of the trance and made sure that they were able to sort of carry on and not do anything silly. But it was fascinating. So I just wondered, because there's a lot of narrative in the suggestions when you're talking to people. You're taking them on a journey down into the subconscious mind or into different levels of the mind. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about how the hypnosis and the suggestion of stuff and narrative all joins together.
Yep. It's a big topic. So stage hypnosis is generally quite different from
Yes.
therapeutic hypnosis. Yeah.
And I realized that very early on, that it was a completely different animal. And actually, I was more interested in the helping hypnosis, or the more therapy hypnosis, taking away pain, trying to stop people from smoking and stuff, because I realized there was dangers on the stage stuff, and it was a different animal, even though I wasn't later to be an entertainer. But anyway, sorry. But
no
yes,
worries.
you're
So if we focused on the therapeutic end of it, I mean, actually, there's a kind of there are like a bunch of things you can do, like help people stop smoking. You can help people reduce pain. It's very good for first aid, funnily enough. If somebody's bleeding a lot, you can literally lean down, whisper in there, and say, "I would like you to, that part of your mind that controls your blood, to stop that bleeding." It's incredibly effective. You can do it to minimize the effect of burns. So you literally, it's very simple. If someone's burnt their arm or their leg or wherever it is, you you just tell them, I'd like you to imagine you're sticking your arm, your leg, whatever, deep into a snowdrift, a cold, dripping, icy snowdrift. Feel the snowdrift, see the snow all around that arm. Feel that snow, feel that wetness. It's a kind of uncomfortable, the coldness. It's almost painful. It's so cold. It's so cold in that snowdrift. Astonishingly, the body pays attention to that. The body doesn't take instructions like literal words, it pays attention to imagery. So if
Right.
you imagine that snowdrift vividly, see it, feel it, even smell that coldness in the air, that crispness in the air when it's snowing, um, the body responds to imagery, and to sensation, not to instructions. Although I have to say, weirdly, it does seem to help if you tell people to stop doing internal bleeding. So so there's a little bit of first aid, a hint. And there's some interesting research on that. It's not just me making it up. There was a guy called Dabney Ewan, past president of an American clinical hypnosis association, who was also a surgeon, who did amazing work with people who had had burns, and published on it.
Mm.
Similarly, stopping things like smoking. But in general, as I say in the book, although I was accidentally very good at hypnosis, I ended up doing less hypnosis because mostly our job is to help people be more in charge of their own lives, not to control them, but to help them be more in control of themselves. The way I used to put it was happy to face the challenges life offers. You're not going to win them all, but you should be happy to face them. And if that's as good as it gets, frankly, and it's pretty good, because life's going to throw you some challenges, and if you can rise to them and do your best, you're doing a pretty damn good job. That's pretty cool. And the link back to what we were talking about earlier is that abstractions are inherently hypnotic. So one of the ways that we construct a hypnotic suggestion, one of the typical tools, is to use a non-specific reference. So, Richard, I'd like you to think, just take a moment and think of the last time somebody paid you a compliment, a big compliment or a little compliment. Just take a moment, think, somebody paid you a compliment. They might have said, what a nice shirt, or I really appreciated your talk, whatever it was. Not my idea, your idea. Notice that. Remember what they looked like when they said that. See them again in front of you. And do it until you just get that little feeling inside yourself of, oh, thank you. Yeah?
Yes.
So I'm just evoking in you a little feeling, a pleasant feeling when somebody said something nice. What a good guy you are. And I didn't know any of the detail. No. I just talked abstractly about a certain person who told you a compliment. Not this. I gave a few examples, but I didn't tell you the words. I didn't paint the picture. You did that. Yes. You remembered a certain person, a certain time. So me saying certain person, certain time, that's a non-specific reference. Your brain fills in the gap and makes the picture and generates the feeling. One of the big challenges that collectively we face at the moment is that there are a very large number of abstractions which are taken to be more true than reality. A really classic, well, there are two controversial ones, but I'll pick just one of them, which is critical race theory suggests that even though you don't know it, Richard, and even though I don't know it, we are racist because we are part of a system that we are unconscious of, right? Yes. I call this being frightened of ghosts. I mean, there are many ghosts, and that's one of them. But if I were to believe in that ghost, then it will control my behavior. It'll make me think, oh, I can't do that because it's racist, or I've got to do that because it's anti-racist, right?
Yes, yes.
If I'm stuck with that belief in something completely unreal, but abstract, right? One element, I take out of you one element, the color of your skin, probably the least important thing about you, right? And I said, that's the most important thing about you. Uh, you can say, well, you're just nuts, Hugh, forget it. But if you take it seriously, you've put your head in a box. You are stuck now inside something which will direct your life with hypnotic power until you
And
escape it.
and you're self-censoring on things that you would say, oh, I better not say that in case, even though it is, you're not saying anything derogatory about anybody, but you're just going, oh, I better not say that because that might be part of this abstract idea of I'm being racist. And so you start changing your behavior. I suppose it's the same thing as what you've just alluded to when the compliment was given to me, and I then pictured the person, how they were dressed, how they were feeling, the smile on their face, all those things you didn't know. But if I'm talking to somebody and I think, oh yes, I have to be so careful that I am not saying anything racist because I am, according to this theory, naturally racist. It's in the DNA because of historic events and somehow I've been born into it with certain privileges. I have to condition myself so carefully so I can't make flippant statements or just off the cuff statements. So it sort of really contains me and keeps me in my place in a way, even though ordinarily the flippancy or the jokes and things would not be in any other circumstances seen as racist. It's not like I'm making an actual slur on somebody's colour or culture or any of those things. It's just I would, if I take it seriously, self-censor, which is happening all the time. We are self-censoring ourselves because of a number of I mean, again, on YouTube we have a number of things that we feel we can't talk about because they're very abstract, and YouTube in particular has its terms and conditions, but they're not in bullet points. You can't say this and you can't say that and you can't say that. They are, you mustn't have hate speech or this sort of thing, and you go, well, where's the definition of what hate speech is? Where is it? What can I say? Where's the line? And
But beyond that, there isn't. And worse still, Richard, a definition is an abstraction.
right.
In itself, it's a definition sits there in the dictionary. I might use the word kettle, right, to mean pot, right? I've got to go and put the kettle on the stove, meaning pot, right? But
Yes.
the definition says X, right? So I'm not allowed to mess with the definition. So this goes very deep into our language. So not only do we have the problem of taking abstractions more seriously than reality, there are many ghosts. There are ghosts about not just race, about climate, about gender, about any number of other things that are non-real. They're abstractions that are that when people are inside those abstractions, they are governed by them as they would be, as they are, because it's a form of hypnosis. And you might ask yourself, well, why don't they wake up? Consider a number of activities and interventions and things that have happened over the last 2 or 3 years. We were told this about them, and more evidence comes out that, in fact, that is not a good thing. We were told this, it's a good thing. And now we find, no, that. And every day in the newspaper, another example of that. And you think, oh dear, that's rather unfortunate. I hope it wasn't caused by the thing that was
Yes.
good, wasn't it? But why don't people change their minds, Richard? Because they're stuck. They're still hypnotized. And
even
one more,
oh no, go on.
just one more thing that you alluded to earlier. I mustn't say X, this self-censoring thing.
Yes.
It's a nightmare. Don't think of elephants. Well, you're screwed now, aren't you? The moment what do you do? So that's a horrible thing to live with, right? An injunction which says I must not think of X. I'm going to think of X all the bloody time. So if I've got two things going on, one, I've got a box saying you're a bad person because you're privileged or whatever, or you're this color or that color. You're necessarily bad, and anything you do is dangerous. And now I mustn't think of X. What a nightmare! What a horrible place to live.
And I mean, without sort of going into it in any length, we had, I felt, in this country, got, the 70s, we had a problem with the way people perceived new people coming into the country. We got over that, where everything was fine, didn't matter what race, creed, colour that people were. Then all of a sudden, as it starts to become highlighted, just as you say, and we're told we can't think of it. And now when you meet somebody who is somewhat different from yourself, you're looking at all the differences and going, oh, blimey, I am aware of those differences and I mustn't say a word about them. And we saw perhaps that quite an example of that, where a member of royalty at an event who asked somebody where they came from, and although they had the speech of, I think, a London borough, pressed the point, yeah, but where do you come from? And it was deemed to be a completely racist incident because the person presenting had really ramped up the appearance of actually coming from somewhere else, and what they said just seemed to be at odds with how they were dressed, and so you could see how anyone would be mistaken. And of course, it all gets blown up. And this is a big problem when you've got these organisations who are deliberately putting people into this situation to whip up a frenzy. It would seem to me.
That is another interpretation is that they really think they're trying to help.
Right.
If I'm hypnotized and I'm told that this onion is an apple, I think it's delicious, and I think you should eat it. These apples are delicious, Richard. Eat this apple, right? And you say, "Don't be stupid. That's an onion." I say, "What? I can tell you, what a good apple. You really should eat it." So, remember, we also suffer from this very, very underdeveloped emotional understanding. So people can quite quickly go from, I've got a good idea, to, you should jolly well believe me, right?
Yes.
Full on, right? And they think they're trying to help. But we want to be in this, whatever it is, the paradise, wherever you get to, if everybody suddenly believes in critical race theory. I don't think they've really thought it through, but they feel very strongly that if everyone did that, it would be a better world. I've tried to sort of work out what that might be. It's difficult, but I think, as the saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So just as the people came on the television and said, you've got to take this particular thing and you mustn't go out of your house and you must stick this thing on your head, all of that stuff, which mostly turns out to be either nonsense or dangerous nonsense, perhaps there were some bad people there. There are always a few bad people. But I think there were a lot of good people who were profoundly hypnotized and perhaps, let's say, unsophisticated. People who were trying, they probably had a lot of anxiety, probably coming from the fact that they knew there was something a bit wrong. But when people get a little anxious, they cling on more tightly to what they imagine to be true, even when there's a lot of evidence that it's not right. So they get kind of more keen to say, no, it must be right. It must be right. Otherwise, I'm wrong. Yes. And that's a terrible thing to feel.
Especially when half the world is doing, or more than half the world, 90% of the world are also implementing and doing the same thing. It does seem... So here's a question then. How do you de-hypnotize those people who are, with all the good intentions, feel that they're doing the right thing, even though here we are in a situation in which everywhere you look there seems to be evidence that actually it wasn't such a good idea, except the people who were at the top, i.e. the government in this particular instance, are still sticking to their guns and not saying there was anything wrong. And yet everywhere else you look, and even in some parts of mainstream media, people are beginning to sort of go, oh, well, actually, maybe it wasn't. How do you de-hypnotize people so that they can see the error, if you like?
It's the big question. And I would suggest...
That's why I suggested it.
This is one of the answers, right? So this book has no mention of these medical interventions or anything like that.
No.
Um, but what has it got? For a start, it's got a lot of stories in it.
Mm.
Now, if I tell you a story, lots of things could happen. You could get bored, you could fall asleep. So, oh, that's fun. But it's difficult to disagree with it. I say, no, it's fiction. Don't worry. It's just a story. It's
Mm.
just a story about these people who climbed up into the sky. What do you mean? How did they do that? It's a story, Richard. Chill. So
Yeah.
I can tell you a story. I can tell you a story of my own life. I can tell you a traditional story. I can even make one up. Um, and as I say in the book, I've got, as a storyteller, I have two very strict rules: no titles and no morals. So it's not up to me to tell you what the meaning of that story is. The story comes from, let us say, it comes from us. It comes from people. And particularly traditional stories, there's something interesting about them. We know the ones that were collected by Grimm's and the Arabian Nights, all these collections of stories, they're written down. But they originally were told from one person to another and another and another. So why would you repeat a story? Something about it you liked. Right?
Yes.
And then if you tell it to your mate and your mate tells it to his girlfriend, well, why would he do that? It was just something made him want to say it, right? So for all of these traditional stories, thousands and thousands of people have thought, I feel like telling that story. I want to tell that story, right? So there's something that appeals to thousands and thousands of humans. And let us say perhaps not one thing, but a bunch of things, or a certain aspect, or some element of this story appeals to me, and something appeals to you, and something else appeals to somebody else. And it kind of gets bashed about a bit and changed, but still there's something carries on. And the bit that carries on for a long time has something that's profoundly human in it.
Yes.
And you can't boil it down to a single line, because people would have done, right? And in fact, they have. If I say something like, a rolling stone gathers no moss, that's kind of, we say that, or
Mm.
many a slip
Mm.
twixt the cup and the lip. These one-liners, there's something in them. They're kind of boiled down bits of wisdom, but they don't say things like, look left, look right, look left again. That's a kind of very pedantic modern version, which wouldn't work in Vietnam because you get run over by somebody coming from the right. But the stories that we have, that we've inherited, have something profoundly human in them.
Mm.
And I can't explain them. I don't try to explain them because I don't know what the explanation is. I'm going to suggest they have a depth to them. And the reason I can't explain them is because explain comes from the Latin ex plano, which means to lay flat. And if understanding has depth and
You
I lay
can't.
it flat,
Yes.
I lose it. So that's the first way to dehypnotize people. And in a funny way, it's you kind of it's not hypnosis, but when I tell a story, I take you into the world of the story, right?
Yes.
So I use your ability to come with me out of the everyday world into this world where squirrels can come charging out of the forest and threaten you with knives and pitchforks and things, right? Um, and we go into this other world, but there's something profoundly human about it. And then we come back, and 9 times out of 10, it's kind of like a refreshment, to have
No,
listened
no,
to
I
a
agree.
story.
And I use in the monologues that I do, I use a lot of allegory where I'm telling a story of something that's happened that relates to perhaps what we're facing at the moment, that people can immediately relate to. But because it's my story, and I may say something like, "Oh, I read this in a thing," or I'm just telling you the story. Because it's a story, no one can challenge you and say it's right or wrong. They can't say, "Oh no, that didn't happen." They might say it's unlikely. That's different, and that may be true. It may be unlikely. But if I'm telling a story about a town called Biggleswick, and who turned and decided that their council was all incompetent and weren't doing what the people wanted, so they had their own council and diverted their council tax to that new council, and so instead of having cameras and plant pots barring the roads, they had the sort of things that people wanted. People might say, Well, that sounds great for them, as indeed I did actually have from people across the world saying, hey, we want to contact these people in Biggleswick. Um, and saying, well, really the point of the story is about, well, they can make up their own mind, but for me, the point of the story is that people in that town made up their own mind and decided to do this. If you wanted to, you could do the same. That's all I'm sort of really saying. The details are down to the use. But so the use of storytelling for me has been immensely useful in a very difficult world in which you've got censorship and you can't say certain things. And so the audience, of course, are clever enough to understand what you're saying and interpreting the story and deciding for themselves whether it's something they want to listen to or not, or take it further. And so I've found the storytelling element, and particularly in your book, you know, the importance of it, and just reminding ourselves that the spoken word has so much more power than, even though of course the irony is we're all reading it as
Absolutely.
and you do make that point yourself, then it is great. And I just think it's, and people love to tell stories, don't they? They tell jokes, you know, people hear a joke and I must tell that to my friend. And it's not the same if you email it or post it on a Facebook thing, you know, you're in the pub and you'll say, oh, I must tell you this, you know, and then
Yeah, absolutely.
It's lovely. The spoken word is an amazing thing.
And I'm going to throw a couple of other things, because the question you asked is such a good one. You know, how can we help people get dehypnotized? Firstly, tell some stories. Secondly, have a kind of maybe attitude to a lot of these. When you hear some dictate saying you must do X, you know, or that's terrible nonsense, or indeed people who perhaps with whom you agree, you know, say something, and you're with the hypnotized people, you can say, well, maybe that's funny, isn't it? That's a bit odd. And try not to lead to a conclusion. I like to open a question and then walk away. As you might have noticed with the book, you said earlier, you know, I open stuff and then I don't finish it off. Well, I don't finish it off because maybe you've got a better answer, Richard. You know, maybe so my example. The other thing is to you know, in a light-hearted way, be an example of someone who perhaps doesn't take these things quite as seriously as others, and show them that you're not dead yet, or whatever. Right?
Yes, I like that.
My third point, and you've again, I want to pick up on what you said. You know, people are like thinking. They're often told not to.
Yes.
Weirdly. Then told not to think by schools, which say you must think this, not that. Right?
Yes.
That's not thinking at all. That's like taking your medicine. But people enjoy thinking. So I had a market research business for 12 years. So I traveled around and I literally met Mr. Average. That was my job, Mr. and Mrs. Average, at various types of, you know, levels of society and ages and geographical and whatever. And I have to say it was quite a relief after being a psychotherapist, because when you're a psychotherapist, you can't help but feel, oh my God, everyone's got these problems and their parents were horrible and whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then I go out and do market research and I discover actually people are really nice. Like 99.999% of people they're nice, they're astute, and they're full of goodwill, right?
Yes.
They have three problems which are very widespread. One is they're really bad at reading leaflets and instructions. You know, when you test people on, like, please read that leaflet, what should it say? Yeah. 9 times out of 10, they get it wrong. The second thing is that they are misinformed, a remarkable amount of misinformation. And thirdly, they are disempowered. And misinformation and disempowerment are two very powerful effects, primarily of television, funnily enough. That's the best way to do it to people. If you want to disempower someone, you appear on the television and say, hello, I am Mr. Important and I'm reading the news, or I am a celebrity and I'm much more wealthy than you, and what's more, I'm on television, which means I'm more important than you. You're just sitting there on your couch. You're a little nobody. I, however, am in Broadcasting House, and even though I sound like a complete idiot, I must be better than you because I'm on the telly.
Yes.
And if that happens to you every goddamn day, you begin to fall for it. You think that person is better than me because they're on the telly. That doesn't matter so much as one of them. But the reflection of that, which is, I'm not that good, that's the bad bit. I'm
Yeah.
not that important because I'm not on the telly. And most people never consciously think that, but it's the effect of watching too much TV or paying too much attention to celebrities or believing that a celebrity is in some way better than you or me. And I can tell you from close examination, that's not true.
Yes.
um, so people, uh, now the problem is, of course, in many situations, if you can't read leaflets critically, or you tend not to, and you're disempowered and you're misinformed, you're a bit adrift when you hit these big abstractions, right? Somebody dumping an abstraction on you saying, you must do this, otherwise somebody else is going to die. It's too easy to take that seriously. Um, I have the great advantage of one, never owning a television, and B, I've been disagreeing with people forever. So it's kind of normal for me. But if you're used to agreeing with people, it's kind of hard to
Yes.
to suddenly turn around and say, Jim, I think you're maybe wrong.
Yeah. And people have found that, particularly, with certain things in recent times, like Brexit, difference of opinions. If you felt like, oh, you can't have that opinion, it's not the opinion that everybody has, or an opinion on the pandemic, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
net zero, think any of the big issues that we've got.
Mm.
If you have a difference of opinion from the mainstream narrative, which is coming down the television, as you just alluded to, then you feel very disempowered because, again, you don't know who you can talk to because everybody's being pushed down this funnel to agree with the perceived wisdom that is from the authority. But somebody like you clearly has no problem arguing about any of that. People can get your book, The Bug in Our Thinking, and they can find out what that bug might be and the way to fix it. Where do they get that from? Presumably it's available on all good bookshops, etc., etc.
Yeah, it's the best place to get it if you're in the UK is from my own website, which is we'll put a link down. I hope you can do that for
Yes,
me.
I will do that.
It'll be basically hughwillbourn.com/book. Um, and if you put in there's a little box you can put a code in. If you put VOBES in that, VOBES, you'll get a £2 discount. So
Wow.
and that will run until, let's say, till the end of November, right? So not only
Okay.
can you get a £2 discount, but after you've read it and you've recommended it to your friends, so long as they buy before the end of November, they'll get £2 off by putting VOBES on the website thing. You can order it through bookshops. You can get it off Amazon if you're not in the UK, and on Amazon it's also an ebook and an audiobook if you like audiobooks. But
Okay.
if you can and you're in the UK, buy it from me, please. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Hugh, I've enjoyed our conversation. The hour is up. Well, it's just up by nearly 10
Oh my
minutes.
goodness.
It just disappeared. A thoroughly interesting book. I hope you enjoy it. I'd love to read the comments if you've read it and you want to come back to the video to leave comments. But as Hugh says, get it from his website. It's always good to help the author out. Well done. And it would be nice, you said earlier on in the conversation, it would be much nicer to have had this conversation in person. So maybe one day when you've got another book out or you're in the country or whatever like that, we'll meet up and have that cup of tea in person rather than on Zoom, which is always
That would be a
great.
delight. I look forward to it.
Fantastic. Hugh, thank you so much for being my guest today. It's been a fascinating conversation. So there you go. Do check it out. And meanwhile, I will be, of course, back with more of my storytelling narratives and monologues as well as wonderful interviews with some rather special people. Until then, from Hugh and I, thanks for watching. Goodbye.